concepts. And we'll look at non-suicidal self-injury today. We'll look at general anxiety disorders, OCD, PTSD, depression, bipolar schizophrenia, other than. We'll cover a lot of that throughout the week, but I think we'll get to ADHD and non-suicidal self-injury. All right, so what is a disorder, right? We hear the term, we say, hey, someone has a disorder. Usually our antenna goes up and we think that is a very bad thing, right? But maybe in a more practical sense, we should be looking at a disorder as someone who is atypical, right? And so we say atypical, what's that mean? Well, we say if we took a group of individuals and put them in a normal sort of distribution, we would say that people who are disordered may lie on the tail ends of a normal distribution. So what does that mean? Normal means, hey, we have normal sort of accepted behavior. What we generally accept as typical behavior, right, that people present. Typical thoughts, typical patterns of thoughts, typical expressions of emotions given a situation, right? And if we see things out of that, then we would say, okay, that appears to be out of order. So it is a syndrome marked by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's thinking, right? Cognition, we say disturbance in your emotion regulation, right? Not able to control your emotions, and behavior, right? And that's defined by the APA. The APA is our most fundamentally major association for all the psychological field. There's also the American Psychiatric Association, which is different. But generally, if you get your degree in psychology, you would join the APA, right? There's a ton of research and conferences you can get involved with all over the country, all over the world, in essence. All right, is it dysfunctional or maladaptive? Does it impede your function? Does your behavior, does your thinking, does your emotions sort of get in the way of your day-to-day functions, right? Or even your long-term functions for your goals? We think of disorder too, is it a problem to you only? Or is it a problem to others? And that's usually how we're gonna define a disorder, right? So if in this classroom here, if someone was to be doing some sort of behavior and it kind of alerted us and it disturbed us, it annoyed us, we would say, hey, we have disordered behavior within the classroom, something out of the normal, right? Because we would have an understanding of what normal behavior in the classroom looks like, something that we would pay attention to. Maladaptive, right? Maladaptive means against your own survival. It's stopping you from survival. Maybe you need others to help you. Right? Maybe you need others to help facilitate a lot of things throughout your day-to-day. Right? So the behavior, the thoughts, or the emotions are stopping you from actually surviving, right? Or growing or adapting to your environment. Often accompanied by distress, right? Some signal of distress. Is it distress in the mind with your thoughts? Are you ruminating, repeating things? Are you fixated of some sort? It could be distress of the emotions, right? Intense sense of feelings about things, uncontrollable waves and floods of emotions. It could be physiological things. You could say, well, you know what? I feel actual physical pain because of this state of mind. All right, so we got two approaches. Here we got medical model. All right, so primarily before hospitals replaced asylums, before hospitals kind of really grew out, In our country, we had asylums. Usually we would put people away, sort of take them out of society, and maybe examine them, research them. A lot of times they didn't have rights, so essentially they were almost like lab rats to be studied. A lot of times families never showed up to come see these individuals at asylums, and they were just kind of left to their own state of mind. Usually it was a worse scenario than even before, and people's sort of state of minds deteriorated over time. All right, so now we have the medical model. Mental illness are diagnosed on the basis of symptoms, treated through therapy, and cured. Right? Or we say Freud thought that we could cure people's sort of mental illnesses. I wouldn't necessarily say we can cure an individual, but we can sort of manage people's issues. Genetically influenced brain structure and biochemical abnormalities contribute to mental illness. Right? So we do say, wait, there could be something very biological here. It could be your brain structure, it could be hormones, prenatal sort of issues, abnormalities, all sorts of things outside of just your own thinking, feeling, behaving. Right? Maybe there's some other influences. Then we have our biopsychosocial approach. Right? Psychologists study how biological, psychological, and socio-cultural factors interact to produce psychological disorders. Right? So we're looking at things like epigenetics, vulnerability, stress models. How vulnerable are you to stress? Right? What are the precursors in the environment that causes you to have anxiety, to not be able to control your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors? If you fundamentally think about it, we're looking at the root cause of many things is like factors of escaping thoughts, right? Not having the ability to control yourself. It's really just almost like a loss of self-control. And we're looking at a lot of disorders. All right, so what are some of the influences that create psychological disorders, right? We'll look at how we're going to diagnose them, and they're not as easy as you think, right? In everyday language, we tend to diagnose people by, oh, that person has ADHD, I think that person has autism, but in order to get clinically diagnosed, you have to meet a host of criteria over a prolonged, enduring time frame. And we say, hey, there's different degrees. Like it would be if you went to your general physician, right? And say you have an issue, is it mild, is it moderate, or severe? Right? So it's not as easy to diagnose. It takes time, and it needs to have severe sort of cases. But some influences, evolution, right? We have evolved, and so that means we can't all be the same, right? We've evolved for different environments, different mind frames, different cultures, right? Individual genes, we say predispositions. Maybe you're susceptible to have a certain trait that can lead to disorder. Brain structure and chemistry, right? We say your hormones could be the issue. Maybe it is something prenatal with your brain structure. Maybe there was traumatic brain injuries and so on. Right? And we say psychological influences, stress, right? The major one is stress. And really, how do you think about stress? Stress is really a loss of control of your mind, right? Your thoughts, a fixation of the future, a fixation thinking something bad is about to occur, problem solving, making decisions, making choices. Right? Trauma, right? If you've experienced some sort of mental trauma, major factor. Learned helplessness. Right? If I think we talked about locus of control. Do you think that you have more internal control over your life, or are you helpless? Right? All the control is in the external world. There's nothing you can do about it, and that can lead to a lot of learned helplessness. Right? Maybe mom or dad had the same sort of mind frame. Mood-related perceptions and memory. Right? Maybe your perceptions or your moods quickly change with memories, thoughts about yesterday, last week, last month, right? And these mood swings are sort of affecting your mind state. Other sociocultural influences, the role. What is the role you play in life, right? Is it meeting your expectations? Have you created meaning for yourself? All right, think about this. We invent meaning. What's the meaning of life? Nobody knows. Subjective, manufactured, created, invented. And maybe some people haven't invented or created their own meaning of life. They're just floating by. And if you're floating by, you just kind of probably in a state of confusion, anxiety, because you have no directed goal to your own existence. Your expectations, are they unrealistic? Right? Did you plan on being president of the United States? Didn't meet it? Did you want to be a billionaire? PhD psychology professor or something of the sort? Right? Didn't meet the expectations. Depression comes from that. And then definitions of normality and disorder. Remember we say, hey, it's not bad. I don't know if all disorders are bad. We just say it just doesn't work in a normal setting. Just really that simple. Someone says, hey, I have ADHD. Like, hey, you just might not be right for the classroom, for a standard sort of way the classrooms are set up. Maybe you need a special classroom, right? Maybe you need something special. Doesn't mean you're bad, just means it's abnormal. All right, classifying disorders and labeling people, right? We need classification, we need to organize meaning, definitions, concepts, right? So it is a useful tool of understanding knowledge, just to classify. Obviously, classifying anything comes at a cost, especially when we're talking about psychological or social things. Think of race. Like we've classified people as races of people, and really, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? Right? You're like, well, it means that, oh, you're black, or you're white, or you're Latin, or I'm like, okay, we get that, maybe lineage, heritage. It doesn't mean anything more. We're like, well, in a negative sense, it's probably us prejudging people and thinking that they think, feel, behave a certain way, even though we have no information about them. Generalize a whole classification of groups of people, right, for our own convenience and our own comfort. We say human beings love convenience over anything, they love comfort over anything, which means that ignorance oftentimes is a factor of convenience and comfort when it comes to people. So classifications are always good, but then we have to label people, right? Usually in the context of whatever sort of environment those labels are in, there could be negative consequences. Right? So we gotta look at labels. But we do want to predict the disorder's future course, suggest appropriate treatment and prompt research. So we do need the classification so we can focus on the research at a particular area, figure out what treatments are appropriate. And then we have the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Anyone's ever heard of the DSM? Well, who else has heard of the DSM? What is the DSM? What is it?
It's essentially your dictionary or your diagnostic tool. What's the word? It's labeling people of all the disorders.
No, that's a manual.
Diagnose.
Manual for diagnosis, right? It gives you all the, and we're currently in the DSM-5, 5th edition, although each edition gets revised. I think it's like the TR-5 right now, text revision 5. So yes, if you look in the DSM-5, you can find every disorder out there and the criteria to meet it, right? So descriptions of facets of the disorders, severity, right? Mild, moderate, severe cases, what that will look like, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the WHO, who's familiar with the World Health Organization. right? Okay, so above that we have the International Classification of Diseases. So we say DSM is America, right? The ICD is the world. You would think of sort of United Nations oriented means for us to all kind of agree on what a disease is, a particular disease. So you can look at the ICD, I think it may be ICD 11 or 10 right now. And obviously the World Health Organization classified it and stuff like COVID, right? We have to all agree on that this is a thing, right? So we have some sort of consensus on stuff globally with the International Classification of Diseases. And then we have the National Institute on Mental Health Research Domain Criteria, or RDOC. We could look through that domain and find a host of new research about things within new sort of features of disorders that are going on, right? What are the criteria for those? All right, so there's some changes, right? We say, hey, labeling people pros and cons. We need to classify, but oftentimes it can stigmatize people, right? It can make the condition worse. Now that you have this stigma on you, this label on you, you probably don't walk around telling everybody about it. They probably walk around telling everybody about you, right? You and your label, right? You have autism. My son and my daughter is autistic. We say, all right, that's wonderful if we're trying to solve a problem, but bad if it becomes a social thing to where a person who's ignorant of what that particular disorder is, or even what it means, because it's, like a spectrum of a multitude of things, they can use that to weaponize to sort of harm other people. All right, so we have autism and Asperger's syndrome equals now autism spectrum disorder. All right, so what used to be Asperger's and autism is now classified into one grouping, which is the spectrum. Prior we had mental retardation. I remember that even in the 80s. When I was a small kid, that was the language that was used. And obviously there were very negative perceptions about children who face mental retardation, used for bullying and stuff like that. Now we say intellectual disability. You're disabled intellectually with something. Hoarding disorder and binge eating disorder added. Right? So these are new recent additions to the DSM-5. So we look at binge eating disorder relative to managing stress, depression, and then hoarding disorder. Right? Anyone who's ever seen the show Hoarders to see how how difficult a challenge that could be to someone's day-to-day life as well as others within their lives. Anyone ever seen the show Hoarders? Good show. Some criticisms, right? Everything should be criticized. This is how we improve over time. We have to question things and say, hey, they're not necessarily universal, they're not necessarily always contextual. There's usually some issues. So WireNet pathologizes everyday life. So here's a criticism. Hey, you know what? Maybe we're all disordered. Pick your disorder today. You say maybe, the argument be, hey, all you hear out in the world is mental health. Every single thing. Is this a coincidence? Right? That 15 years ago you didn't hear about mental health as much. When I was a kid, it didn't come up that much. Like mental health, what are you talking about? Like just live. Everybody's just living, just figuring it out. Now we're like, oh, everything. I think you have a mental health disorder. You should check yourself out, right? The criticism would be like, hey, all right, we've scattered and made everything mental health, right? And maybe we should not do so, right? Maybe there could be powers beyond to make everyone seem as if they have mental health issues for economic purposes. Organizations arise out of that. You're like, well, it's wonderful, right? Create these markets of economic sort of growth based on using mental health. Right? Trying to figure out that everybody has a problem. Too broad, right? Subjective diagnostic labels. We say, hey, all right, this stuff is subjective, right? Maybe each person needs their own label or something. biasing powers of labels. Maybe you say, hey, you know what? Maybe certain groups of people are more inclined to possibly have a certain disorder or be labeled with a certain disorder. So now you've also created another issue, right? Based on even maybe cultural factors, right? So now it's like, oh, okay, we've kind of discriminated and created some bias, even more bias socially because of the labels of some sort. Right, so think about that even with your generation, because we could create more bias by saying, hey, your generation is ADHD, okay? Because they were literally born with the technology that we who were not born in it knows create impulsivity to check the phone a gazillion times a day, for notifications, social media, yada, yada, yada. And so we could be biased and be like, hey, you know what, I have a little bit more discipline because I wasn't born in it, right, to adapt to it. Whereas you all were literally probably handed it at 1, 2 years old, like, hey, get on your tablet and be quiet. Right, and you're like, well, that's kind of biased, that's a generational bias, you're absolutely right, right? So that could be another criticism. Why is there controversy over attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? Well, remember we say, hey, you know what? Like, well, I do poor in class because I can't pay attention, right? I do poor in class because I'm on my phone, laptop, my thoughts escape me all the time. I'm not interested in the subject at all, but I still got to get a grade, right? They've made it a requirement for me to take this class. Right, I'm interested in the class. And now you get a bad grade. And now you get several bad grades, people are like, hey, I'm not really interested in 98% of the stuff at the school that I went to, right? Elementary school, high school. Like, I'm really just interested in like a few things. Remember we say, if you're not interested, right? Because this unconscious mind is about 80% of you. That unconscious brain, that antenna, is not going to stimulate you. The antenna is not going to work. So now you're struggling in a class because you say, hey, my antenna only comes about when you say something of interest that's personal to me, that I've already had an interest in, or we said new, novel. It was novel and unique. I never heard that term. Professor Ross, could you repeat that please? What's up? Let me Google that real quick. All right? So we can't have the expectations to say like, hey, everybody should get A's in class and have the attention and be disciplined. Because I don't know if that really even equates to anything. Does that equate to people being successful or achieving their goals? We may find that those standard models we've been using for a very long time, a lot of people are consistently unhappy with the results 30, 40, 50 years later, right? Working at a factory job or something where they felt that that was all that was taught, instructed to them at the schools. All right, so controversy. Right, we say, hey, you know, ADHD, you're only interested in what you're interested in, and that's what you pay attention to. Or you say, hey, you know what? You have stress-related issues. So how come you can't pay attention to the stuff? You be like, I'm under stress. And what stress do to the mind? Makes the mind chaotic, you can't focus. How can you focus on anything when your mind is constantly wandering off into other areas? Constantly. Right? Think how fascinating you are as an organism. You can't sit through this class without moving your leg. It's impossible. We're all free to be like, you know what? Don't touch your face. Don't shake your leg. Don't do none of that for 50 minutes. Because we're going to execute you. You would be dead in 3 minutes. Think about that. You're like, well, that's impossible. I don't have control of myself. Literally, if you don't have, if I could say in 3 minutes, you can't even do that under the fear of death. Ask yourself again, do you have control of yourself? Right? You say, I make my own choices and decisions. That all sounds wonderful. Right? But it's a fantasy. It's not the truth. It's a very, very small partial truth. Right? When I said that unconscious mind is about 80% of you. You get 20% slither of possibly making a choice. This is even if your mind doesn't wander off to other areas while you're trying to make the choice. All right, so we say, hey, symptoms. You fidget in class a lot more than others. Impulsivity, because we say attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is impulsivity. I just can't help myself. Right? I gotta do something. Just a lack of focus. Right? You just can't focus. Your mind is drift, and then it comes back. Come back. Right? All sorts of things. Right? So we say, yeah, we can have a disorder label, but maybe we should also look at some other things. Because if we don't consider what a classroom looks like or some other environment, and we just say it's just a person, that could be an issue. Right? Because remember we say, even with our cognitive bias of attribution error, we always think it's the person, not the situation. Right? We typically address the person like, hey, that's just your personality. Be like, I just hate classrooms. Problem solved. Right? Bottom line, extreme inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity can derail social, academic, and work achievements. And we say, hey, within a normal environment, work, social, or academic, yes, you probably will have some issues if you can't address these particular symptoms, right? Doesn't make you a bad person. You say, hey, depending on these normal environments, it either works for me or doesn't, right? So maybe you have to create your sort of own unique environment. Medication and therapies for it, all sorts of things. Debate continues over whether normal high energy is too often diagnosed as psychiatric disorder, right? They say, hey, it's not bad, you have a lot of energy. I don't think that's bad that you have so much energy. So much you can't control yourself. Maybe that's bad for probably the classroom. Yeah. Why? Because you got 30 other people in the classroom trying to pay attention, learn, and you can't. Right? So we say, now we need to address that in some other way. Is it greater good, lesser evil? Who wins? The 30 people, or do we allow one person to take over the classroom? Right? So now we get into sort of political debates. Okay, risk of harm to self and others. Understanding suicide, right? Suicide. State of mind. Which one wants to exit this experience, this life, this condition? Right? Here we're talking about trying to understand it and some non-suicide sort of facilitation, like injuring yourself without even wanting to really kill yourself, right? What are the mechanisms, reasons behind that? Suicide risk increases with anxiety and depression. State of mind. These are states. State means in this particular time, temporal. Right? This particular time, how much weight is something bearing on you? Anxiety, stress, depression, emotional pain, physical pain. Right? And you say, hey, you know what? My mind has reached a state, a capacity to where it no longer is capable of dealing with these factors. Right? Controversial topic about should people have the ability to kill themselves, right? Or should the government should interact and intervene? Do you have a right on your own life? Right? All these sort of philosophical, political theories. So it increases with anxiety or depression. Right? Remember we say anxiety is up, depression is down. Anxiety is too much on the plus side. Depression is too far on the negative. Right? So we say, hey, you're out of that normal distribution again, right? We say normal's in the middle, where you can continue on living life without too much irregular sort of issues. Risk increases with rebound of these disorders, right? We think of depression, we think of low hopelessness. There is no hope for tomorrow, right? Irrational mind, because we could say we probably felt that way many times, and there was another tomorrow again, right? It might have been tomorrow was wonderful, where the sun was out, and you were jogging, and you fell in love, and you hit the lottery and won $1 billion. Who knows? Nobody knows, right? So it's an irrational mind of like a future that one thinks will never happen. Social suggestions may trigger suicide, right? Hanging around negative people, right? People who are not positive. Because if you're in your weak state of mind, you're extremely vulnerable to kind of anyone's opinions and subjections to yourself. So it's like even the most ignorant person can have influence, right? And that's why we say things like social media. I mean, people say, well, I'm an influencer. I go, of what kind? Negative or positive sort of attributes that can harm people. Right? Social suggestions, which means that you can be in a society that kind of lean more towards meaninglessness, right? Hopelessness. Remember we say, hey, theoretically that could be true. But if your life is about inventing, manufacturing your own meaning, you should do that every day. Every day show. Suicide is often unpredictable, right? Unpredictable. I can't read your mind. Can you read the person sitting next to you's mind? I got no clue. You might smile on my face and be extremely depressed. Right? Might be on the verge of something. I might be on the verge of something, right? We look and say, why does the billionaire commit suicide? I didn't see that one coming. Well, he lost 900 million. So he's only left with 100 million. Right? That makes no sense. Of course it doesn't make sense. Right? That's what it is. It's a state of mind of irrationality. Right? Unpredictable. We don't know how people are feeling. We kind of can, can have a sense of intuition if you have a personal relationship with someone, because you do understand their behaviors and emotions. You can kind of read them a little bit better. But oftentimes, people are savvy enough to where they can elude us and just out the blue sort of get exit. All right, researchers report different group suicide rates. All right, let's see if we can pull up suicide rates around the globe really quick. Does anyone know anyone, I won't get too personal, that has committed suicide? Let's say non-family members. Right, in my lifetime, there's been really a lot of suicide from friends, even in high school, early days of college. There are some relatives along the way. There are people to me, that, particularly, that just seem very happy. Like most of the people I know that this has occurred with, I don't think it was expected, right? I think it was managed and it happens to be very unexpected. All right, let's see, suicide rates by country. Okay, suicide rates around the world. Estimated rate of suicide per 100,000 population, right, per capita in selected countries in 2019. So information is just a few years outdated, but we say, hey, Russian men tend to be on the highest list. Why do you think that would be? If you're just going to kind of make a guesstimation. Right? Maybe we say, hey, look, maybe it's the climate. We say Russia's cold. I wonder if anything has a contributing factor. It's cold all the time. Right? It's not a latitude that's just cold. I wonder if temperature has to deal with happiness of any kind. Maybe. Does political system, right? You say, well, lack of kind of freedom still politically. Right? I wonder if that has something to do with it. South African men, right? South Korea. United States is pretty high. Although we enjoy some of the greatest pleasures, why would this be such a great issue as opposed to other countries? What are your thoughts? Why would the U.S. be fourth on this list, even though we enjoy such great pleasures, conveniences, comforts?
We have really great health inequality. Health inequality is worse than it was during the French Revolution and right before it, so.
You say, hey, you know what? The richer the country, possibly the greater the inequality. Right? Like, there's a lot of people killing it out there, billions, millionaires, new millionaires every day. Like, most of us, no. Those people trying to live paycheck to paycheck, right? Trying to survive a lot of pressure. Things not working out. A lot of envy. If you have a lot of wealthy people, you may envy them. And now your whole sort of self-esteem has gone down because you're not meeting these unrealistic expectations. Right? All right, so national differences, racial differences, gender differences, right? Trade differences, age differences, day of the week, seasonal differences, right? You say suicide rates may increase during winter months in Chicago. If you looked at today, like why? It's just a bad season. Summertime, everyone's out happy. Gun ownership versus no gun ownership. Men have a higher degree of suicide than women, right? And it is linked to gun ownership. The access to in life in an instance may matter as opposed to suffering on the way out. Right? Women tend to behave in more cutting behaviors, right? Yes,
Do you know, of suicide rates, like in the previous one that you had, there's a difference between men and women. Generally, men have higher, however, I've heard, that the difference is generally, I had one professor that claimed that the entire difference was entirely by method. So basically, if you attempt suicide and don't succeed, you're not put into the stats. Therefore, men pick more lethal options such as guns, i.e. So, basically she was saying like, there is no suicide difference between gender. However, I was wondering what data or stats you have for that. Because I do think there is the bias in that, obviously, because of lethal methods and whether it gets added, but also like, once you try and weed through the noise, do we know the data?
Yeah, I think if you dig deeper, you would say, well, differences between the sexes. What is a fixation for sort of the mechanisms out there? Such as like, men may lean to have more of a tendency of paying attention more to weapons, right? Knives, guns, things that could be extremely dangerous, whereas women may not have that fixation priority, right? So even in our mind, our schemas, our concepts of like tools, there's a whole different thing between the sexes, right? That could be part of it. The other part, I think for the most part, they lean towards the primary methods of addressing stress issues or stress-related issues, but there's a tendency for men to not be antisocial, meaning isolation, and men tend to self-medicate. Men think that they can, have a tendency to think that they can solve their own problems, whereas women tend to socialize more with problems. So it's a big thing there, right? You say, well, okay, what society are we talking about? We're talking about masculine society where, hey, you're a man, shut up, solve your problem, right, man up. And then maybe, you know, you say here in America, for the most part, things are changing, but we say, all right, women say, hey, I have a problem calling mom, my sister, my best friend. I socialize. People know about this issue, and now they're coming together to help. You know, men may drive to say, that's a sign of weakness. I'm gonna solve it like I solve any other problem in my life. And that's a myth of solving, self-medicating a mental issue, right? Because a mental issue deals with you, right? Your mind can't even get to the point to where you can address your own mind, right? You're trying to get the mind to address the mind, which is an issue. So a lot of those, but yes, you're absolutely right. It is biased because we may have to look at, you know, fixations on weapons, social aspects, what society is talking about, what's the context, all of the above. But, you know, in psychology, we love to generalize to make it simple. We love to generalize. All right, I think our time is, what time is it?
53.
Okay, sorry. Time is up. I will see you.